Ella Fitzgerald's former Beverly Hills home, a mid-century modern marvel nestled in the hills, has long been a point of fascination for music lovers and paranormal enthusiasts alike. The house, with its expansive glass walls, polished wooden floors, and a grand piano in the living room, still echoes with the glamour of the jazz age. It began when the Wilkins family moved into the home in the spring of 2010. Jennifer and Michael Wilkins, along with their teenage daughter Clara, were thrilled to live in a house with such rich history. As avid fans of jazz, the knowledge that the First Lady of Song had once walked the halls made their new home feel almost magical. But the magic soon took on a mysterious edge. One quiet summer night, Jennifer awoke to the sound of faint music. Groggy and disoriented, she initially thought it was coming from Clara's room. As she followed the melody down the hall, she realized the sound wasn't coming from her daughter's stereo, it was emanating from the living room. When she reached the source, she froze. The room was empty, but the unmistakable strains of summertime filled the air. The grand piano sat still and silent, its lid closed. Jennifer stood there, heart pounding, until the music faded into silence. Michael dismissed her experience as a vivid dream, but 2 nights later he heard it too. This time it was Ella's rendition of Misty. He found himself drawn to the living room, where he saw something that made his blood run cold. A faint figure sitting at the piano. The figure's head tilted slightly as if lost in the music. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The occurrences became more frequent. Clara, a budding musician, would practice her violin in the evenings, only to stop suddenly when she felt someone watching her. She described the sensation as warm, not scary, like someone who loved music was listening. One afternoon, as she sat practicing in the sun-drenched living room, Clara glanced up to see a reflection in the glass wall opposite her. A woman stood behind her, elegant and serene, with a soft smile. When Clara turned, there was no one there. The Wilkins weren't the only ones who experienced strange happenings. Friends who visited the house reported hearing snatches of jazz melodies, often when no music was playing. A repairman who came to fix the air conditioning swore he saw a woman in a flowing gown standing by the piano. She looked like she belonged there, he said, but when I looked again, she was gone. One particularly eerie event occurred during a small gathering the Wilkins hosted. As their guests mingled in the living room, the piano lid suddenly lifted with a soft creak. A single, resonant note played, followed by silence. The room fell still, everyone staring at the instrument. Michael nervously joked about Ella making an appearance, but the unease lingered. After the guests left, Jennifer found an old record tucked under the piano bench that hadn't been there before. It was Ella's Live in Berlin album. She placed it on their vintage record player, and as the first track began, she swore she heard a soft, contented sigh echo through the room. The Wilkins family eventually came to see the presence as a blessing rather than a curse. They believed Ella's spirit lingered, not out of unrest, but out of love for the music that had defined her life. When they sold the house in 2020, they left a note for the new owners. If you hear music in the night or see a figure by the piano, don't be afraid. It's just Ella keeping the jazz alive. The new owners reportedly embraced the home's peculiar charm. To this day, visitors and passers-by claim to hear soft jazz drifting through the air on quiet evenings, a haunting reminder of a legend who never truly left. When the Harrisons, a young couple with a penchant for mid-century design, purchased the house in 2020, they were charmed by its history but skeptical of the tales left by the previous owners. Kate Harrison laughed off the stories, calling them a little Hollywood drama, while her husband, Ethan, was more bemused than concerned. They moved in, eager to make the home their own, yet they couldn't ignore a certain lingering atmosphere, a weight in the air, as if the house itself was listening. The first month passed uneventfully, and the couple began to forget about the Wilkins note. But on an unseasonably warm October evening, as Kate unpacked boxes in the living room, she noticed something strange. The grand piano, untouched since their move, had a thin layer of dust on its lid, except for one spot. There, a single fingerprint was pressed into the dust, its outline sharp and fresh. Kate called Ethan over, but he dismissed it, saying she must have touched it without realizing. Still, she felt uneasy, especially when she cleaned the lid thoroughly only to find a similar print reappear the next morning. Ethan's skepticism began to waver one night when he was working late in the den. As he typed away, a low, resonant note drifted through the house, startling him. He froze, listening intently. It came again, clearer this time. A single piano key struck deliberately, like a call for attention. Gathering his courage, Ethan stepped into the hallway, the hair on his arms standing on end. The sound led him to the living room. The piano sat in the dark, its keys gleaming faintly in the moonlight streaming through the glass walls. He flipped on the light, expecting to find Kate playing a prank. Instead, the room was empty. A sudden chill passed over him, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a shimmer in the air, as if the room itself had exhaled. He didn't tell Kate, not wanting to alarm her, but the experience lingered in his mind. A few weeks later, the Harrisons received a surprise visitor. Clara Wilkins, now in her early 20s, arrived unannounced. She had been passing through Los Angeles and felt compelled to visit her old home. Kate, intrigued by the connection, invited her in for tea. As they talked, Clara's eyes wandered to the piano. "Has she played for you yet?" she asked casually. Kate blinked in confusion. "Who?" Clara smiled faintly, but her expression held a tinge of sadness. "Ella," she said. "She loved that piano. She used to sit there for hours, lost in her music. I think she still does." Kate laughed nervously, brushing off Clara's comment as eccentric nostalgia. But before leaving, Clara pressed a small, worn notebook into Kate's hands. "Keep this," she said. "It helped me understand her. You might need it." That night, Kate flipped through the notebook. It was filled with handwritten notes, song lyrics, and sketches of the piano. One phrase stood out, written over and over in elegant script: "The music never stops." Not long after Clara's visit, the activity in the house grew stranger. Doors would close softly on their own. The faint smell of perfume, light and floral wafted through the air, and the piano began to produce more than single notes. Full chords, played with precision and feeling, would echo through the house, always in the dead of night. One evening, as Kate sat reading in the living room, she thought she saw movement in her peripheral vision. Glancing up, she gasped. A figure stood near the piano, tall, poised, with a radiant grace. It wasn't solid, more like a silhouette made of smoke and moonlight, but it was undeniably there. Kate blinked, and it was gone. But the lid of the piano was now open. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. After the figure vanished, Kate sat frozen, her breath shallow and her heart racing. The lid of the piano, previously closed for months, now stood ajar, as if silently inviting her closer. She hesitated before approaching, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the instrument. Just as her fingers grazed the smooth wood, a faint, warm breeze seemed to flow from the keys, carrying with it a subtle, unmistakable melody, the opening notes of Blue Skies. Kate stumbled back, staring at the piano. Her rational mind told her it was impossible, yet there was no denying what she'd heard. The melody lingered, soft and faint, as though coming from another room or another time. When Ethan returned home later that night, he found Kate seated in the living room, the notebook Clara had given her open in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. Without waiting for him to ask, she whispered, "She's here. She's really here." Determined to uncover more, Kate began to pore over the notebook, searching for clues. Scattered among the lyrics and sketches were cryptic annotations, words and phrases that seemed to hint at something deeper. "Listen closely," one note read. "The keys hold the truth," said another. What did Ella mean? The next day, as sunlight spilled into the living room, Kate opened the piano bench to search for anything unusual. Inside, she found sheet music, yellowed with age, and a small velvet pouch. She opened it to reveal an old locket, tarnished but still beautiful. Inside the locket was a black and white photo of Ella at the piano, her hands poised gracefully over the keys. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in neat, looping handwriting. For those who truly hear, the song never ends. That night, Kate had a vivid dream. She was seated in the living room, the grand piano glowing softly in the dim light. The air was filled with music smooth, rich, and alive. Across from her, Ella Fitzgerald sat at the piano, her fingers dancing over the keys with effortless grace. Ella turned to Kate, her gaze warm and knowing. "You're listening now," Ella said softly, her voice as melodic as her singing. "But are you ready to play?" Before Kate could respond, she woke with a start, her heart pounding. The dream felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. She glanced at the piano, bathed in moonlight, and noticed the locket she'd left on the coffee table was now sitting atop the piano's closed lid. Ethan, still skeptical but increasingly unsettled, tried to dismiss the occurrences. But one evening, as he worked in the den, he heard something that sent chills down his spine. It wasn't the piano this time, it was applause. Faint but unmistakable. It sounded as though a small crowd had gathered in the living room, clapping after a performance. Ethan crept toward the sound, his pulse quickening. When he peeked into the living room, it was empty. The applause stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence. A week later, a letter arrived at the house with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing an elegant, handwritten note. "You've been chosen to keep the music alive. The piano will guide you. But remember, once the song begins, it cannot be stopped." Kate and Ethan exchanged uneasy glances. What did it mean? And who had sent it? That night, unable to sleep, Kate sat at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, unsure but compelled to play. Slowly, she pressed the first note. The sound resonated deeply, almost unnaturally, as if the piano were alive. She played another note, then another, and suddenly her hands seemed to move on their own. A hauntingly beautiful melody poured out, one she'd never heard before but somehow knew by heart. As the music filled the room, Kate felt a presence behind her. She didn't dare turn around, but the air grew warm, and a familiar voice whispered in her ear, "Keep playing. The song is just beginning." As Kate's hands moved across the piano keys, the melody seemed to envelop the room, wrapping it in an otherworldly warmth. The air grew heavy, thick with a sense of something unseen yet undeniably present. From the corner of her eye, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of light or shadow near the far wall, but she couldn't stop playing. Her fingers no longer felt like her own, as if they were guided by an invisible force. The melody changed, deepening into a bluesy riff that sent a shiver down her spine. Suddenly, Kate noticed the room had grown darker, the only light now emanating from the piano itself. Its polished surface gleamed faintly, as though illuminated by a hidden spotlight. Ethan, hearing the music from the bedroom, came downstairs. "Kate," he called, but his voice sounded distant, muffled, as if the house had swallowed it. When he entered the living room, he froze. Kate sat at the piano, her back rigid, her hands moving with an almost unnatural speed. Her head was tilted slightly, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "Kate," he said again, louder this time. She didn't respond. Ethan moved closer, reaching out to touch her shoulder. Just as his hand made contact, the music stopped abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Kate gasped, her hands jerking away from the keys as though burned. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you hear it?" "Hear what?" "You were playing." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "It wasn't just me. She was here. I felt her. I saw her." Ethan's eyes darted around the room, his skin prickling. "Saw who?" Kate didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the locket on the piano. Opening it, she noticed something that hadn't been there before. The photo of Ella was the same, but now there was a faint inscription etched along the edges of the locket's interior. "Play on and you will see." The following day, Kate and Ethan decided to investigate the house's history further. They contacted a local historian who specialized in Beverly Hills estates. The historian, a wiry man named Gerald, was eager to help and brought over a folder of documents about the house's past. "Did you know," Gerald began, flipping through the papers, "that Ella Fitzgerald hosted intimate jam sessions here in the late 50s? Some of jazz's greatest legends gathered in this very room." Kate nodded, trying to mask her unease. "We've heard some things." Gerald paused, then leaned in conspiratorially. "There's also a story," he said in a hushed tone, "that Ella recorded a secret composition here. A piece meant only for her closest confidants. Some say it was never finished, but those who've heard even a fragment claim it's unforgettable." Ethan frowned. "A secret composition?" Gerald shrugged. "No one's ever found it. But if it exists, it would be priceless." That night, unable to sleep, Kate found herself staring at the large framed portrait of Ella that hung in the hallway. The painting's eyes seemed to follow her, filled with an uncanny vitality. On impulse, she ran her fingers along the frame's edge and froze. There was a small indentation at the back, almost imperceptible, as if it concealed something. She fetched a knife from the kitchen and carefully pried open the frame. Inside was a thin, worn sheet of music. The title at the top read, "Eternal Refrain." As Kate laid the sheet music on the piano stand, a strange feeling overcame her. The notes on the page seemed to shimmer, shifting slightly, as though alive. Against her better judgment, she began to play. The first few chords were hauntingly beautiful, resonating with a depth that made her chest tighten. As the melody unfolded, the room seemed to warp around her. Shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally, and the faint scent of Ella's signature perfume, jasmine and vanilla, filled the air. Then came the voice. Soft at first, it rose from the corners of the room, rich and velvety, carrying lyrics Kate had never heard but somehow knew. "When the night grows quiet, the echoes play. In the heart of shadows, I'll find my way." Ethan, watching from the doorway, felt rooted to the spot, his skin crawling. The voice was unmistakable. It was Ella Fitzgerald. As the final note lingered, a chilling realization washed over them both. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, and the music was its pulse. That night, the piano began to play on its own, a soft, mournful tune that echoed through the house. Kate and Ethan sat together in the living room, unable to leave, unable to speak. The shadows on the walls shifted, forming shapes, figures. They weren't alone. Silhouettes of musicians appeared, their outlines faint but distinct, their movements rhythmic as they swayed to the music. A saxophone wailed softly, joined by the smooth hum of a bass. At the center of it all, near the piano, stood Ella. Her form was translucent, shimmering like smoke, but her presence was undeniable. She turned toward Kate, her face serene yet commanding, and spoke in a voice that resonated like the final note of a perfect song. "You've opened the door. Are you ready for what's on the other side?" Kate's heart pounded in her chest as Ella's figure seemed to grow clearer, more defined. The shadows around her deepened, transforming into an ensemble of ghostly musicians, all frozen in time, their instruments still vibrating with life. Kate could hear the breath of a trumpet player, the pull of a violin bow. Every sound seemed to form a thick, rich atmosphere, the air vibrating with the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Ethan, still standing by the door, whispered, "Kate, what's happening?" Kate didn't answer. She felt herself being drawn into the scene, her body almost moving against her will, as if the room itself was pulling her in. The locket in her hand seemed to hum, a steady pulse that matched the rhythm of the music. Then, Ella's translucent form stepped closer, her gaze locking with Kate's. There was something in her eyes, something ancient and knowing. "The song has a power." "Kate," Ella's voice rang out, clearer than ever. "You felt it, haven't you? It's not just music, it's memory. It's life, and it's death, bound together in every note. You've been listening to it all along, even when you didn't realize." Kate's breath caught. She understood then, the music, the visions, the feeling of being watched, it was all leading to this. She wasn't just hearing Ella's voice. She was becoming part of it. A strange, inexplicable warmth enveloped her, and before she could react, Her hands found the piano keys once more. With a trembling finger, she played. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was as if her fingers had a mind of their own, slipping effortlessly over the keys, bringing the forgotten melody to life. As she played, the room began to shift again. The walls dissolved, and Kate could see into other dimensions scenes of Ella's past performances, flashing in and out of view. The crowd, the stage lights, the laughter, the tears, each memory danced through the air like a fading echo. But it wasn't just Ella's memories. As she played, Kate felt fragments of her own life unraveling and stitching together moments she had forgotten, regrets she had buried deep. The music was a bridge between the past and the present, pulling her into an eternal moment where time no longer existed. Ethan stepped forward, his face pale as he watched in awe and fear. He tried to speak, but no words came out. There was a weight in the air, a stillness that made it impossible for anything to move, except for Kate's fingers on the keys. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music stopped. The room fell into a profound silence. The shadows of the musicians, the haunting figure of Ella, everything disappeared. Kate was alone at the piano, breathing heavily, her hands shaking. But she was not the same. Ethan rushed to her side. "Kate, are you okay?" He touched her shoulder gently, and her eyes fluttered open. There was a moment of recognition. Kate wasn't just herself anymore. She was part of Ella's world now, caught in the same timeless rhythm. Kate looked up at him, a strange calmness in her expression. "I understand now. Ella, she didn't just live through her music. She's still here. Her soul, her voice, it lives in every note, every chord. She's left something behind, something more than just memories." Ethan, still trying to process, glanced around the room. It was as if everything had returned to normal, no shadows, no ghostly figures. Yet there was a lingering feeling, an unmistakable presence. The music was gone, but the house seemed to breathe in unison with Kate. Then, as if on cue, a soft melody played once more. This time, it wasn't the piano. It was the wind, whistling through the windows, carrying with it an unmistakable tune, Blue Skies. Kate smiled faintly, her eyes closed. She was no longer afraid. She had become part of the music, part of the legend. And somewhere, in the deepest corners of the house, the echoes of Ella Fitzgerald's voice would continue to sing forever. Ethan, watching Kate in quiet reverence, knew that the house was no longer just a place. It was a living, breathing connection to the past, a conduit for something beyond this world. As the last notes of the song drifted away into the night, he whispered to himself, "Some stories are never meant to end. Some songs never stop playing." And in the distance, if one listened closely enough, the soft applause could be heard, as though an invisible audience was still gathered, listening. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.